Hello everyone and welcome back. Today we are diving into a super interesting topic, and that is how to use ChatGPT in Excel VBA. Now you may have ever found yourself stuck while writing VBA code, or if you're looking for a quick solution, then ChatGPT might seem like a lifesaver. But here's the thing, it's not always perfect, and it can never replace the solid understanding of VBA. In this video, I'm going to share when ChatGPT can be your best friend and also when you should definitely think twice before using it. It's all about finding that balance, and by the end of this, you will exactly know how to get the most out of ChatGPT for your Excel projects without getting into any kind of trouble. So, let's get started. Alright, now that we have got the intro out of the way, let's jump into how you should be using ChatGPT with Excel VBA. Trust me, when used right, it can really save you time and help you level up your coding. But as with anything, you've got to know the right way to go about it. I've divided this video in three main sections. How to use ChatGPT in Excel VBA, how not to use ChatGPT in Excel VBA, and best practices for using ChatGPT with VBA. So let's begin with how to use ChatGPT in Excel VBA. First up, let's talk about troubleshooting. We have all been there. You're writing some VBA code and boom, you hit an error, something like object required or type mismatch. Now you could spend hours Googling or searching through forums. But here's where ChatGPT steps in. You can just copy the error message or the problematic code and paste it into ChatGPT with a simple question like, why am I getting this error? Let's take an example. I'm already in the VBA editor. If you're unfamiliar with the VBA editor, I recommend checking out my video titled VBA Editor and Introduction. Let's open up module 1. Here I have commented option explicit because I want to demonstrate something to you. Imagine you're working with the macro, let's say copy data, which copies data from one worksheet to another. Everything seems fine, but suddenly when you run this code, you get this annoying error, runtime error 424, object required. Now, this is a pretty common error, and it can pop up for a bunch of different reasons. If you already know why this error happened, great. But if you don't, then instead of spending hours trying to figure out where things went wrong, you can copy the error message along with the problematic code and paste it into ChatGPT. Let's go ahead and let's try it. Let's copy this code and let's go to ChatGPT. Paste this here and then mention the error message and press the enter key. And you notice that ChatGPT thinks that there are two main issues. One is sheet1.select, which is unnecessary and prone to errors. It is generally better to avoid selecting sheets or ranges and work directly with objects. It is also mentioning that sheet 1 or sheet 2 is not properly referenced or does not exist. It will throw an error. So one of these two could be causing that error. Let's check the solution. You can modify the code to avoid .select method and directly work with the objects. Okay. If sheet 1 and sheet 2 are tab names, which can be different from code names, you can reference them like this. So you can try both. In fact, this code is the same as what we have here. So there's no change here. So let's try this code. I'm going to replace it with this, and I'm going to now run this again. And this time I'm getting a different error, which is runtime error 9 and subscript out of range. So let's go back. I am now getting runtime error 9 on the second code. Or rather, let's describe it, subscript out of range error on the second code. Press the enter key. Now ChatGPT says that this error typically occurs when VBA cannot find the worksheet you're referencing. This is something which was mentioned here as well. Okay, so let's go back and let's check our code. Sheet 1 is here, yes. Sheet 2 is there, no, it is not. And hence we were getting this error. So this is where ChatGPT really shines. It quickly identifies the likely problem and gives you a cleaner, more reliable approach. Notice how it replaced sheet1.select with a direct reference to worksheets sheet 1. Now, there's nothing wrong with this, but I prefer using sheet code name when I'm working with sheets in this workbook. I've spoken about this in my video, Sheets and Worksheets, and how to reference them. Also, by eliminating the need to select the sheet, it prevents errors and speeds up your code. I've spoken about this as well in my video, how to avoid using .select, .activate, etc. But here's the thing, ChatGPT is not always perfect. While it's right most of the time, you still need to check that it works in your specific scenario. Maybe your sheet is named something slightly different, or maybe the issue was elsewhere in your code. So, take its suggestion, but always test and make sure it solves your problem. Now let's move on to another great use case, explaining concepts. Sometimes you are working on a VBA project and you just need a quick refresher. Or maybe you're learning a new concept. This is where ChatGPT really comes in handy. For example, let's say you're trying to understand how a for each loop works in VBA, but you're a little fuzzy on the details. Instead of searching through long tutorials or documentation, you can ask ChatGPT something simple like, how does a for each loop work in VBA? So let's test that as well. How does a for each loop work in VBA? And see how ChatGPT instantly responded. It simply breaks it down for you in plain English. A for each loop in VBA is used to loop through each item in a collection, array, or range. And it also gives you a couple of examples. Now let's take a look at this particular code. This sample code uses a for each loop to loop through all worksheets in a workbook. With this code, you're basically telling Excel, hey, for each worksheet in this workbook, print the name of the worksheet in the immediate window. Simple, right? But if you're new to VBA, this might not be so obvious. That's where ChatGPT helps. It explains these concepts in a way that's easy to understand and even gives you sample code like this to visualize what's happening. So whether you're learning something new or just need a quick reminder, ChatGPT is a great learning companion. Alright, now let's move on to one of my favorite ways to use ChatGPT with VBA. Drafting basic code. This is where ChatGPT can really save you some time, especially if you are just getting started with the project or you need a quick template to build on. Let's say you need to write a simple VBA macro that loops through all the sheets in your workbook and protects them with a password. Instead of sitting down and writing out every line from scratch, you can ask ChatGPT for a head start. Something like, and just like that, ChatGPT gives you a piece of code. Pretty neat, right? In just a few seconds, you've got the structure you need to protect all your worksheets. This is super handy when you're working on repetitive tasks or need some code to get started with. Now, you don't have to sit there typing every line. You've got a template to work from now. But here's where ChatGPT's work best. It doesn't just give you the code, it gives you the basic framework so you can focus on tweaking it to fit your specific needs. Maybe you want to add extra protection options. Or maybe you want to log which sheets were protected. You can easily take the starting point and then build on it. Now let's talk about one of the coolest ways to use ChatGPT. Getting ideas for optimizing your VBA code. You have probably been there, your code works, but you know deep down it could be faster or cleaner. This is where ChatGPT can really come in handy. It's like having a second set of eyes to review your code and give you suggestions for making it better. For example, let's go back to the code. Here we have a procedure called sub check values. This procedure loops through every cell in a large range, checking if each cell contains a specific value. It works, but it's a bit slow. Now, this code will go through all 1000 cells one by one, and it works fine for smaller ranges. But what if you need it to run faster, especially with bigger data sets? Instead of breaking your head over it, you can ask ChatGPT something like this. How can I optimize this VBA code that loops through a range of cells? So once again, let's copy this. Let's go to ChatGPT, paste this code here, press the Shift key and then press the Enter key so that you can continue writing. And here we type the question. How can I optimize this VBA code that loops through a range of cells? And you'll notice that ChatGPT suggests a couple of things to optimize your code. For example, using an array to process the data all at once instead of looping through each cell individually, which can dramatically improve performance. It is also talking about minimizing screen updates. So there are certain Excel features like screen updating and calculation that you can turn off. It is also recommending to avoid repeated object references. So all of this cuts down on the number of interactions with the worksheet, which can significantly speed up the code, especially when you're working with large data sets. Plus, you're not sacrificing readability and the logic is still easy to follow. So if you scroll down, you can see how it is switching off events and how it is working with objects and arrays. So to summarize, ChatGPT is a fantastic tool for quick problem solving, learning concepts, drafting basic code, and even giving you ideas for optimization. But remember, it's not perfect. It gives you a head start, but you have still got to put in the effort to understand, refine, and test the code it generates. Now, I'm going to talk about how not to use ChatGPT, because while it's powerful, it can also lead you down the wrong path if you're not careful. Stick around for that. Alright, now that we have covered how ChatGPT can be a powerful tool for working with VBA, let's shift gears and talk about how not to use it. Like any tool, there are some limitations and pitfalls that you need to be aware of. And it's important not to rely on it blindly. Trust me, I've learned this the hard way. So I'm going to save you some trouble by pointing out a few common mistakes. First things first, one of the biggest mistakes you can make with ChatGPT is blindly copying complex code without understanding it. I get it, you're in a hurry. You've got a problem to solve, and ChatGPT spits out a block of code that looks like it might do the trick. But here's the danger. If you do not fully understand what the code is doing, you're setting yourself up for trouble down the line. Let's say you ask ChatGPT for a macro to consolidate data from multiple sheets into one. You might get something like this. Now, this might look great at first, but if you do not fully understand what's happening, you could run into issues. For example, what if some sheets have a different range than A1 to B10? What if some sheets are hidden or don't need to be included? Without understanding the code, you might not catch these edge cases, which could lead to errors or worse, incorrect data handling. The key takeaway here is do not copy and paste without understanding the logic. Always take the time to review and test the code. Next up, another common mistake is expecting ChatGPT to write perfect code for advanced, complex scenarios. Now, don't get me wrong. ChatGPT is great for basic tasks and quick solutions, but it's not magic. For more advanced projects, especially ones with a lot of dependencies, let's say like interacting with APIs, using external data sources, or dealing with custom add-ins, it's not always reliable. Imagine you're working on a macro that needs to pull data from an external SQL database. you might ask ChatGPT to generate code for this, and it will give you something like as shown in the second procedure. Now this is a good start, but it's definitely not the whole picture. What about error handling? What if the database connection fails? What if there is a timeout? Or what if your SQL query returns a huge data set that crashes your macro? These are things ChatGPT might not cover, and it's up to you to figure them out. So the lesson here is, do not expect ChatGPT to handle all the nuances of advanced projects. It's a great helper, but you need to fill in the blanks and handle the edge cases yourself. Now let's talk about debugging. While ChatGPT can be awesome for solving basic errors like object required or type mismatch, relying on it to fix more complex issues can sometimes lead you down the wrong path. For example, if you're working with VBA code that integrates with external applications like Outlook or PowerPoint, ChatGPT might not always have the right answer. Imagine you've got an error like method send of object mail item failed when trying to send emails via VBA. You might ask ChatGPT for a solution, and it could give you some suggestions, but these errors are often context specific. The issue might be with your Outlook settings, a missing reference, or even an outdated add-in, things that ChatGPT can't diagnose. What I'm saying is, don't expect ChatGPT to be your one-stop shop for fixing complex environment-specific errors. Use it as a guide. But for those tricky, hard-to-solve errors, you'll often need to dig deeper into documentation, forums, or even your specific system's setup. Finally, one mistake I see often is ignoring best practices when using code from ChatGPT. Look, ChatGPT will give you code that works, but it doesn't always follow best practices. Things like error handling, efficiently memory usage, or following coding conventions are often missing. Let's take a look at an example. If you ask ChatGPT to write a macro to open a workbook and do some task, you might get something like this. Look at the first procedure. This works, but there is no error handling. What if the file path is wrong? Or the file is already open? A better practice would be to add some error handling, as I have done in the below procedure. So I'm going to comment the first one, and I'm going to uncomment this. You see the difference in these two procedures? It's a small change, but it ensures that if something goes wrong, your users won't just be left with a silent failure. So while ChatGPT is great at getting you started, always review the code for best practices like error handling, optimizing performance, and keeping your code clean. If you are interested in learning how to do error handling, then there's a video, Error Handling and Debugging in VBA. Definitely check that out. So to wrap up this section, ChatGPT is a fantastic tool, but you have got to be careful how you use it. Don't blindly copy complex code. Don't expect it to solve all your advanced scenarios. And definitely don't rely on it for debugging the trickiest errors. And above all, make sure the code follows best practices. In the end, ChatGPT is just a tool to help you, but you are the developer who has to make sure everything works properly. Now that we have covered the don'ts, let's move on to some best practices for using ChatGPT effectively in your projects. These are the guidelines that will help you get the most out of ChatGPT without falling into the common traps we just discussed. By following these tips, you'll be able to leverage ChatGPT in a way that makes your coding life easier while still maintaining control over your project. So, the first best practice is to treat ChatGPT as a learning tool, not as a shortcut or crutch. What do I mean by that? Well, instead of just copying the code it gives you and moving on, take the time to understand why the code works. Ask ChatGPT questions like, what does this line do? Or can you explain the logic behind this loop? For example, if ChatGPT gives you a for each loop, don't just use it blindly. Ask it to explain how that loop works and how it differs from a regular for loop. You will learn more that way, and over time, you'll need to rely less on ChatGPT because you'll have gained a deeper understanding of VBA yourself. Here's an example. Imagine ChatGPT gives you this loop. I'm talking about the sub loop sheets procedure. Now you could just run this and call it a day. Or you could ask ChatGPT something like, how does this for loop work and what's the advantages of using it over a regular loop? You'll not only get the code, but you'll also get an explanation that helps solidify your understanding of loops in VBA. The more you do this, the faster you'll learn. Let's do this example. So I'm going to copy this. I'll go to ChatGPT, I'll paste this here, and I'll start typing. How does this for each loop work, and what is the advantage of using it over a regular for loop? See how ChatGPT explains the difference? It has also given you a breakdown of the code. Plus, it has explained about every line and also explained about the advantages of using for each over a regular for loop. Okay, next up is testing. This is absolutely very important. No matter how good the code looks, always test it thoroughly before using it in any live or important workbook. ChatGPT can write code that works in theory, but you need to make sure it works in your specific environment. Let's say ChatGPT gives you code to automate emails from Excel. It works when you run it for the first time, but what happens when you run it on a different computer or with a different version of Excel, or let's say with a large data set? These are things ChatGPT can't anticipate, so it is up to you to put the code through its paces. Here's an example. Imagine you have got this simple code to send emails. Before you use it in a project, test it with different email addresses, different message formats, or even on different systems. You might find small bugs or things that need tweaking. And the last thing you want is for your macro to break when it's being used in the real world. Another important best practice is understanding ChatGPT's limitations. ChatGPT can give you good code, but it's not perfect and doesn't have real-time knowledge. For example, it's not aware of the latest Excel updates that might have been released after its training data. This means you need to be cautious when dealing with newer Excel functions or features that may not be fully supported. Let's say you're working with dynamic Excel array formulas, which are relatively new in Excel. You might ask ChatGPT for help with them, but you'll want to double check its output against the latest official documentation because it might be missing newer details. Also keep in mind that ChatGPT is trained on a vast range of information. It's not always going to be 100% accurate or applicable to your specific scenario. So use it to get ideas, but don't take everything at face value. Always verify with official sources if you're unsure. And now the final tip. This tip is all about being smart with your learning. ChatGPT is a fantastic tool, but it shouldn't be your only resource. You should always combine ChatGPT's insight with other learning materials, whether that's official documentation, Stack Overflow, or YouTube tutorials like this one. The goal is to build a well-rounded understanding of VBA. For example, if ChatGPT helps you with a VBA problem, try searching for similar problems on forums like Stack Overflow. You might find additional tips, edge cases, or alternate solutions that ChatGPT didn't mention. Also, sometimes real-world examples or advice from other developers can give you a broader perspective. I've personally learned a lot from sites like Stack Overflow, vbforums.com, and so on. Okay, now imagine you're working on a VBA project that involves interacting with an external API. ChatGPT can get you started with the basics of making HTTP requests, but forums or official documentation might have more details on how to handle things like authentication, rate limits, or even errors. By combining both sources, you'll be much better equipped to handle the project. So, to wrap up this section, If you treat ChatGPT as a learning tool, test everything thoroughly, understand its limitations, and combine it with other resources, you'll get the most out of it. ChatGPT is great at helping you get started and giving you ideas. But at the end of the day, it's your responsibility to understand and refine the code. Now that we have gone through the do's, don'ts, and best practices, you should have a clear idea of how to make ChatGPT your coding assistant without falling into any of the common traps. So, there you have it. ChatGPT can be a very powerful ally in your VBA development journey, but only if you use it wisely. You can use it to troubleshoot, explain, or generate ideas. But remember to understand the code and follow best practices. If you have any questions, feel free to leave a comment in the comment section below, or as usual, you can also email me on support@tamexcel.com. I also have a Facebook page. If you wish, you can also post the question in the Facebook with relevant screenshots, and I'll be more than happy to answer your questions. I would also like to understand, or rather know, how you have been using ChatGPT in the past, or how are you intending to use ChatGPT. Please mention that in the comments. I would love to read your thoughts. Also, if you like the way I explain things, and if you would like to extend support towards this channel, then please go ahead and like this video. Share it with your friends, and yes, if you still have not subscribed to this channel, go ahead and subscribe to this channel by clicking on the bell icon. The best part about subscribing is you'll instantly get an alert when I release my next video. I would also like to inform you that there's a playlist you can learn at your own pace. If you're serious about learning Visual Basic programming from scratch with high quality videos, and that too for free, then definitely check that playlist out. Well, thank you for watching this video, and I'll see you soon in my next video. Until then, happy coding.